Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Earlier today, President Lee Jae Myung held a major press conference marking his first year in office, highlighting his administration's achievements so far and outlining key priorities for the year ahead. From economy and housing market to diplomacy, security, and North Korea policy, the president presented his vision for the second year of his presidency. To help us unpack the key takeaways and what they could mean going forward, we connect with two experts tonight. And first, let's begin with the economic agenda. And for that, we invite Professor Kim Minkyun of Sogang Business School. A very big welcome.
Hi, good evening.
So, Professor, like you said, President Lee today, he highlighted the KOSPI surpassing 8,000 and his AI and semiconductor initiatives as key economic achievements for his first year in office. Despite that, concerns still remain over weak consumer sentiment and the strong dollar. How would you assess the administration's economic performance over the year?
Well, I have to mention about the scope of the KOSPI. Well, always we already mentioned about the KOSPI is undervalued all the time. We're comparing with the growth of our economy as well as our size of economy for the whole of the world. But so especially for before he become a president, because if we're going to compare the KOSPI index, well, it increased by about 5,000. It over 8,000. Already, but of course there are some drops on today, but I think it's kind of another huge achievement in economic policy. But as you know, there is a lot of events during his first year, of course, that we have the Middle East crisis, so that we are dealing with a high price of oil right now. But even though those kind of accident in external environment, I think he's doing very good to manage our economy as well as they're trying to go for the growth, especially with the AI and the semiconductor industry.
Right. So we have seen such kind of accomplishments over the year. When we look ahead now, Professor, President Lee, he identified future industries, economic recovery, and reducing inequality and key priorities for his second year. Given the limited resources we have, where do you think the government should focus its efforts first?
I think they're trying to go for the future growth opportunity. For future growth opportunity, I think it's kind of, they're trying to set the directions for the Korea economy, and they're trying to boost up those kind of economy based on those kind of future economic growth. But future economic growth is basically with our young generation, where they're trying to look for those jobs and they're trying to look for the education. I think it's kind of the very good direction for the economy, for the Koreans' economic future. But indeed, well, we are dealing with a lot of issues real estate issues. Of course, there's high price, and of course, we are dealing with high inflation. But if we're trying to make sure that we're going to set the directions, including AI and any other semiconductor industry for the future growth, I think the roadmap that we're trying to set up for our economy is kind of very critical, especially for indeed we're looking for the future growth, but we are doing very well for the AI and semiconductor industry. But I think future education is the most important topic that they're trying to set up for President Lee.
Future industries, that area would also be very crucial. Now, when we go back to the stocks market, Professor, President Lee also argued that Korean stocks still remain quite undervalued despite, the KOSPI topping 8,000. I wonder if you agree with this, and also, what do you think will it take for the stock market gains to actually translate into stronger jobs, incomes, and consumption?
I guess it's my forecast, but I think there is still room for growth for especially it's going over the 10,000 KOSPI index. I think there's another room. But when you think about those kind of challenges, and of course we are going for those kind of numbers, of course, then we are not going to depend on the numbers for the KOSPI. We're actually looking for the actual growth of the economy for our for our future, of course. So basically, we are dealing with a lot of issues. Of course, the inflation, of course, I mean, the war between Iran and USA, of course, is not over yet. So we are dealing with the high price of oil right now. So those kind of issues has to be solved for, we trying to go for the maybe 10,000 KOSPI index, of course.
And now the challenge could be turning it into broader benefits as well.
Of course.
Now, let's also touch upon housing. President Lee signaled both stronger property taxes and expanded supply as well. Do you think these measures outlined today can help stabilize the real estate market in the country?
Of course, they're trying to, basically maintain the current price of the real estate, especially when it's trying to go for the control the demand. But I think another issue that we're trying to look for real estate is kind of supply side. Of course, in the Seoul metropolitan areas, of course, there's always high demand for those kind of looking for the house or looking for the apartment, of course. But for the government issues, of course, that we're trying to control the demand, well, it's kind of hard task that we're trying to have. But when trying to look for the supply, well, of course, it's going to take a lot of time. And it's going to take a lot of policy, of course, the regulation. There are many issues that we're trying to maintain, to speed up those kind of supply. But even though we're trying to look for those kind of supplies, well, if you go for those kind of eliminate those kind of regulation, and we're trying to go for those kind of boost up the industry, the construction industry, I think where government is trying to look for those kind of side, not the demand side, but the supply side. If they can speed up those kind of supply side, I think demand will be satisfied with those kind of supply. So the real estate, of course, the supply and demand, well, I think they're trying to put more effort on the supply side instead of the demand.
Now, finally, Professor, President Lee has pledged to strengthen AI, semiconductors, robotics, and other future industries to make Korea a leading technology powerhouse. And you also mentioned it's quite important moving forward. What should be the government's most urgent priority in achieving that kind of goal?
Well, if you look at all this media where in the Korea, where of course the CEO of the NVIDIA, of course, the Jensen Huang is here in Korea, of course. He the mention about those kind of our future, like where they trying to say I don't want to mention the specific companies, but he also mentioned about the physical AI, of course. A lot of Korean companies are trying to put a lot of investment in the physical AI industry. Well, I think it's another good point that the Korean direction, of course, because we're looking for those kind of R&D, research and development in the physical industry, and we have resources, of course, that we have like a heavy workforces that they can work on those kind of physical AI industry. Well, I think it's kind of the future that we're going to be there. And of course, that we have some infrastructure, and government is, of course, they're trying to infrastructure for the electricity, and they're trying to eliminate those kind of regulation. Of course, they're trying to go for all this kind of the supporting role as a government, of course, and trying to boost those kind of the AI and the next, of course, the physical AI industry, and of course, with the synergy impact for the our semiconductor industry, I think it's gonna show some bright future for our Korean's economy.
And that's really where Korea's long-term competitiveness may also be decided. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Kim.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Now, turning to foreign policy, President Lee also used today's press conference to outline his vision for Korea's role on the global stage and his administration's diplomatic priorities for the year ahead. And for more on this, we connect to Andrew Millard, head of the Department of International Relations at Changwon National University. Professor Millard, thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you for having me again.
So let's start right away. So in today's conference, President Lee, he emphasized a globally responsible Korea and pragmatic diplomacy centered on national interests. I wonder what message stood out for you the most?
Okay, so I think overall, President Lee's speech today, it was a pretty safe speech when it comes to foreign policy and so on. So I think a lot of people won't be disappointed by what he said, but I also don't think there'll be any jaws dropping around the world either. So I think relatively safe. Now, what we have to remember is when President Lee came into office a year ago, his priorities were very different back then. So back then, it was very much about re-establishing Korea on the global stage. And at the time, President Lee was coming into a very volatile global situation. We had Donald Trump, who had been in office for around 6 months by that point, and Donald Trump was really getting into sort of his tariff war, ramping up a lot of pressure on states around the world, including South Korea, trying to get them to sign these various trade agreements. Now, basically over time, that's kind of waned off a little bit more because of sort of the Supreme Court decision, which overruled that. But that was a huge pressure against President Lee. And then, of course, you also had the Korea-Japan relations to consider. A lot of people expecting that a democratic president would come in and bring up some of the old sort of historical ideas. But actually, President Lee very quickly, even before he went to America on the way, he went to Japan first to show them, look, we're a slightly different government. We want to have good relations with Japan and also strengthen the US, Korea, Japan security agreement and so on. And then you also had the relations with China to consider. You have North Korea, which is now in a very different position than it used to be. So you have all of these positions, but now the honeymoon period, it's over. And so really today was about setting, really for President Lee's goals for his time in office. And what he's basically trying to do is say, look, we have America, we have China, we also have the European Union, we have various partners around the world, but we also want to play a leading role. How can we do that? Through norms-based ideas. So he talked a lot about sovereignty, but also human rights and things like that. And this is very important because this is basically saying, from now on, it doesn't matter whether an issue is related to China or whether it's related to the US or whether it's related to Europe. From the Korean perspective, if it follows our principles, we will support it. If it doesn't follow our principles, we will object to it. We will criticize it. And so I think that's very important. And really the key slogan of irreplaceable Korea, 대체불가능 대한민국, this one for me, very important. This shows that President Lee, he now really wants to step up Korea, not just as some sort of actor, a middle state actor, but now as really a regional and a global actor in various different industries.
Right, so it really set the tone for his plans for the year ahead as well. Now, he also raised some of his ambitions, like revising the Korea-US nuclear agreement, acquiring nuclear-powered submarines, and regaining wartime OPCON as well. Professor, how can Korea expand its strategic autonomy while also maintaining a strong alliance with Washington?
So here we have two very different issues. I mean, they're both security related. But we have the nuclear powered submarines. This is a relatively new topic, but then OPCON is an issue that has been going on now for quite a few years. So I'll mention OPCON first. If we go back to 2015, this is when we created the conditions-based OPCON transition plan, COTP. And in this plan, basically they agreed, both the US and Korea will push for a transition back to Korea regaining operational control in wartime, but we'll do it in a staged process. So starting off with initial operational capability, then full operational capability, then full mission capability. And so for the Koreans, what they're saying now is in 2025, 10 years since we've had this conditions-based idea, now Korea is ready to take control. So you see the Koreans actually saying, you know what, if we could have control today, no problem. We are capable of doing that. But then you have the Americans saying, this is maybe a little bit more political rather than capability driven. And so you see a little difference. And really the difference is not whether they will transfer operational control, but really when. The Koreans are pushing for a quicker transfer, where America, they're looking more around 2029, so a slightly later one, less political. Now, when it comes to nuclear submarine, issues. This one, again, relatively new. They're working very closely on this. I think a lot of progress is being made. The big issue will just come with the fuel, with the uranium enrichment, and this will require the 123 agreement to be revised, which means it must go also through the US Congress, which will slow down things. And then also in terms of non-proliferation, once that's agreed, they'll also have to show it basically to China, Russia, and the others as well. So there's a few issues, but on the whole, really a lot of good progress being made in both of those areas.
Now, Professor, another thing that was notable today was that President Lee, it quite lacked any direct reference to North Korea or denuclearization. How would you read into that?
So for President Lee, this is really a very difficult situation because, let's be honest, what does he really have to say? There's been no major change. So when he came into office a year ago, he was really going to try and re-establish dialogue with North Korea. But as I mentioned before, North Korea's position, it's changed incredibly. North Korea doesn't need South Korea, doesn't need dialogue. So it doesn't really want to come back to the table. So this is one area where President Lee has not made any progress. But also, we know that for North Korea, their position is they will not give up nuclear weapons. They will not denuclearize. And so for President Lee, if he mentions denuclearization, then the North Koreans just don't listen. And again, there's no dialogue. If President Lee mentions engagement with the North, then potentially inside South Korea, he's going to face a lot of domestic pushback as well. So again, there's really not so much that he can focus on. And so he left it out, I think maybe strategically, but answered a couple of questions in the press conference. He had really no other choice.
Right. Then, so amid this situation with North Korea, what do you think could be the main focus of the Lee administration's North Korea policy in the second year?
So I think you really have to take a very realistic look and say, I mean, the North Koreans, they've been very clear on this. They don't want reunification. They are not giving up their nuclear weapons. South Korea basically just has to accept this and basically come up with a new strategy of somehow trying to engage with the North. Now, what they could do is basically try and ignore North Korea, ignore Pyongyang. What they've done in the past is basically they've done things and looked for the North Korean response. How is North Korea reacting to these different policies and issues and things? What they need to do is, say, look, okay, North Korea, you do your own thing. We will build South Korea, again, focus on irreplaceable Korea, strengthen these different areas, and try to find some ways, possibly through Beijing. So it's very interesting to see if President Xi will be mentioning South-North Korea relations in his visit to Pyongyang at the moment. Potentially, it could also be through America. We know that Donald Trump would be very happy to have a summit with Chairman Kim. But again, in that case, President Lee would have to be quite careful that they don't get pushed out by the US and it becomes just symbolic rather than substantive. But generally, they need a very realistic approach in the future.
Right. So really, there's a lot of things going on when it comes to foreign policy with the Lee administration, U.S.-China rivalry, and the deadlock with North Korea, and deepening ties with North Korea, China, and Russia as well. So what do you think will be the biggest factor that will shape the success of the administration's foreign policy in its second year?
I think you kind of just hit the nail on the head there. There's a lot going on, but there's really I don't think there's one specific thing that will define success. I mean, of course, on the whole, like if we come back again to this balancing act, that on the one hand, through security issues, especially now with nuclear-powered submarines and things like that, America is really still the key player. And actually, President Lee, over the past year, he has been tending slightly more towards the US than China. But he also now has this problem. If he continues to play this sort of balancing act between the two, maybe both Beijing and Washington are going to start seeing this as a bit of a sign of weakness. Maybe they're going to lose a bit of trust in in Seoul. So he really does need to start focusing a little bit more. So I think this idea of strengthening South Korea, not trying to work towards either one or the other partners, but strengthening South Korea, becoming a little bit more autonomous. I really think this is actually the best strategy that South Korea can have. Now, the question is, can they achieve this going forward? That's $1 million question. We don't know the answer yet, but I think if he can achieve it, this is likely to be the best outcome all around.
Right, so we will be definitely looking forward to a more autonomous and stronger Korea in the year ahead. But as for now, we'll have to conclude our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Millard.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.